Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
What are we talking about today, Pete?
Today, Dani, we are talking about how do we help organizations scale design thinking.
Great topic, very timely topic, because, and I know you know this, I've been doing a little bit of research in this area, because I've always been really curious about, organizations spend a lot of money and resources and time sending people to design thinking workshops, building design thinking workshops, creating design thinking programs, but I haven't come across very many organizations that have fully scaled design thinking to the point that, it's just a way that the organization works. Mm-hmm. There are some that do it really well, but it doesn't seem to be the norm. Like the ones that scale design thinking really well are exceptional, right? And they're the ones that we hear being talked about a lot because they're exceptional. So I wanted to understand and kind of get to some root causes of why does design thinking fail to scale in organizations? There's three things I've found that came up in my research. So I'm happy to share that. But then also, I thought we could get some of our own insights from our own work experiences.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I'm certainly curious what things you've found. I think, there's a couple of organizations that I know about that have been pretty successful at scaling it up. I've also been involved in a few organizations trying to scale it up, and maybe my perspective is more about how come we didn't manage to do that. So yeah, I'd be keen to get your help in thinking that through and kind of clarifying that, because I could definitely do with that help at the moment, and maybe other people, the listener, will benefit from learning as much from the three things you've discovered in your research. Maybe we'll talk about some good examples and also what hasn't worked and why.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the first finding from my research is one reason that organizations fail to scale design thinking is that leaders of organizations aren't prepared to lead design thinkers.
Okay.
So in my survey data, 87% of individuals that said they received some sort of design thinking training, 87% of those individuals said that their leader either didn't understand what design thinking is, or just didn't have, they didn't get the support they needed from their leader to be able to take what they learned in their training and apply it at work. Which is a big number.
That's a big number. Yeah, that leaves only 13% who did get the right support and whose leaders were enabled and prepared to lead those efforts. Okay. Wow.
This is an interesting one, because then I think about the organizations that I've been involved in, and they send their people off to get design thinking training, but I've never come across a program that teaches leaders about leading design thinkers, or even a design thinking program for leaders.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I've been involved in organizations where we've done the training or the capability building in-house. I'm surprised I'm just getting over that 87%. Wow, it's a shockingly high percentage. I would maybe have gone like 60 or 70, but 87. Yeah, so clearly something to do. And having said that, I've been involved in organizations building design thinking capability. Haven't yet got to the point of focusing on building the capability in in kind of leaders, or maybe to frame that differently, the capability in senior to exec leadership. Because I think, you know, where we've successfully done it in the organizations I've worked with, we've had, you know, leaders taking part in, you know, say like a design thinking sprint and they've come in with a real life business problem. We might have spent several days learning design thinking and doing design thinking at the same time to, you know, to typically step into a group workshop at the beginning with either a really well, you know, from the business leader's point of view, a kind of well considered solution to a problem. They might step in with that, or maybe even at the other end of the scale, step in with a whole bunch of questions around, is this even a customer problem to solve? And then at the end of that design thinking, you know, week or a couple of weeks together, stepping out with a whole bunch more clarity around what the problem actually is, and then some potential solutions, having between those stepping in and stepping out gone through several cycles of interacting and interviewing customers to understand their needs, coming up with some initial definitions of what their needs are and what the problems are to solve, ideating around potential solutions, building prototypes of those solutions, going back to customers, testing them, and so on and so on. So, you know, we've had, I guess, leaders, I would define them as people who owned the kind of the business problem to solve, come through, and they've stepped out with a different perspective of how easy it is to actually talk to customers and understand their needs, and how quickly you can go from big question to, usually in the first effort, that they've discarded some ideas that were previously, I guess, being considered for full scale delivery. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but early efforts tend to help eliminate the bad ideas rather than land on the best ideas. But these leaders then go out and communicate what they've just been through to their leaders and then their leaders. So kind of going from the middle of their organization upwards. And yet often it's a battle or has been a battle for them to, I guess, explain what they've just gone through and get support for continuing with the iterative process. You know, we had a really good, or one of the best design sprints we had. We emerged out of it with a really good prototype service for phone repair. The team who owned that really had to fight very hard to continue with an iterative approach to prototype and test that service, to figure out and understand which parts of it would work and not work in real life. So yeah, the keywords there for me are like the fight hard for and work really hard to convince people that it was the right approach to take, rather than you know, just go ahead and deliver the thing or ignore it because it came out of this unusual design thinking approach.
And how frustrating that must be, right? Like,
oh yeah,
so your organization's invested in you to go get this, to learn how to work this way.
Yeah.
Now you come back excited, right? Like, I've got a new skill set. I want to put this to use, you know. Yeah. And then you come back only to have to fight for the thing that they paid to train you to do.
Yeah. And maybe even more bewildering if, you know, the paying, if you like, hasn't been done to an external provider. It's been done within the organization. So, you know, you kind of got this approach that seems to have been legitimized and adopted and accepted by the organization because there's a small team within it that's actually putting it into practice and helping solve problems in a human-centered way. And yeah, it must have been, well, I know it was because I spoke to the people and had to, or helped them through that continuing experience, but bewildering, perplexing, frustrating, all those challenging. Everybody learned lots, but yeah, where I haven't got to so far is focusing on that senior to exec leadership level. Maybe that's the start point I started with. Well done, Peter. You've remembered your Billy Connolly get to the punchline. I think where organizations need to focus, if we're thinking of activating or enabling leaders, it's the kind of middle to or senior to exec level. I think that's where the key to unlocking things is, or one of them.
I agree, and
yeah. And you disagree?
No, I don't disagree.
Okay.
So in my view, if you're going to scale, if the intent is to scale anything, whether it's, whatever it is, it has to exist in every layer of the organization.
Yeah, okay.
And that level of existence may be different in some parts of the organization than others, right? Like design thinking might be more prevalently used in some areas than others, but there needs to be a general knowledge or understanding of what it is and how it informs the way people work. Because if there isn't, and that doesn't exist at all levels, then I think that's when you run into those situations of, okay, so now I've got to convince or I have to fight for this way of working.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you want to, I guess, from a design, taking a design point of view on it, where removing barriers and designing on-ramps to a general understanding. I like the fact that you've talked about every kind of layer part of the organization. I think I talk about having a diagonal slice of the organization in a design team, and by diagonal I mean it's goes up and down the organization as well as across it. So you might have somebody from finance, somebody from marketing, somebody from technology, somebody from the design team, somebody from customer experience, somebody from the store, somebody from all these different people, and up and down wise you have people who interact with customers, all the way to somebody who's got ownership and decision making rights. It doesn't take care of help the senior and exec layer of the organization. Sorry, I brought us back to that same point. So maybe what I could be wrong in my mental model. The picture in my mind is of that diagonal slice of people, the group of people in the organization, and then taking part in the work itself, and then those senior to exec leaders not taking part in the work and having to experience it in a different way. But maybe that's what's been holding my thinking back.
Why can't we use? Executives have to solve problems every day.
Yeah.
So why can executive teams be trained in using design thinking to solve the problems that they're facing?
There is no reasonable reason that they can't, and therefore they could be trained to do that, to solve problems in that way. Yeah.
So this brings me to the second thing that I found in my research.
Okay, this isn't rehearsed, by the way.
It is not. So the second finding was that organizations fail to see design thinking can solve real business problems. So often design thinking is relegated to certain parts of the business. So product, marketing. Now we're starting to see it more in HR functions, but it's not seen as something we can use for serious problems. And again, I know some organizations do, so this is that we're generalizing here. But I've also had this experience. For some part of my career, I worked in regulatory compliance in banking. And I was often questioned about using design thinking in that area. And my argument to that was, well, design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving. Compliance, if you strip compliance back to its core, it's really about keeping people safe. Whether you're doing that in a factory or a manufacturing setting, or you're doing that in cybersecurity or banking or lending rules, whatever that is, the intent of it is. So to me, there was this connection between using design thinking in regulatory compliance, but it was always seen like, well, regulatory compliance is too serious of a thing. Couldn't possibly use design thinking to use that.
They do seem like, or on the surface or at first glance, maybe first thought, seem like opposites. But if you frame up as compliance as keeping people safe, well, yeah, what could be a more human-centered problem to solve, or human-centered intent? Okay, so coming back to the organizations need to see design thinking can solve real business problems. Keeping people safe is a real business problem. However you frame it, whether it's stop people getting injured or worse in a factory, or like you're saying, regulatory compliance in the bank is all about keeping people's finances protected and safe. Okay, so that's number 2.
Not stats around that. This is mostly qualitative things that came up of people just talking about, and also where people talked about where in their organization this was being used. And what I saw was that most mention were in roles like product, customer experience, marketing, those types of functions. I did not see very many mention of it in other areas like risk and compliance or finance.
One of the organizations I worked with, I did work with the finance team, with the financial accounting team, actually. The design thinking team I was working with and part of, we'd been going for a wee while, demonstrating the value maybe. And in that team, yeah, it's interesting that maybe it's another reason that it didn't scale, because we did start. I guess this is a good reinforcing point that I like to describe. When we started off in that organization, we had to go knocking on people's doors to say, hey, we hear you've got a problem. We think we can help you understand it better and solve it. We've got this thing called design thinking that we'd like to try it. And some brave people initially said, yeah, okay, we'll give it a go. And eventually we started getting people knocking on our door instead. They would come and say, hey, can we try using that design thinking thing you've got to solve our problem? And one of those teams eventually was our financial accounting team. And they had the problem of their month-end close process was so complex and inefficient and full of tension within the organization that it would, they might get a day or two literally between closing one month end and beginning the process to start closing the next month end. It was really taking a toll on the finance team themselves, the financial accounting team themselves. So they came in, we took a human-centered design thinking approach to looking at that problem. That was the first time they'd looked at it from human point of view rather than a process improvement point of view. So we had the team come in and take part in some, quick and initial familiarization with design thinking as a concept and with some methods. And then we had them go and talk to their internal customers. So there are people who were part of the month-end process. And, typically there were people who were cost center owners. They had a budget that they were looking after for the financial year. And then every month they would get an update on how the budget was going. And simply by spending half an hour to 45 minutes with those cost center managers, they were able to reframe month end from, here's a process that we do as financial accountants that involves gathering information, processing it, and communicating that information back out, seeing it their job as really, in some cases, having the power to make a difference in somebody's weekend with their family. Because some cost center owners were spending weekends either actually working on their numbers or worrying about them. Likewise, evening time or morning time. So the light bulbs for the financial accounting team came when they realized that it wasn't just processing data and getting numbers right, but it was also helping their colleagues literally have a better quality of life. And seeing it with that additional and slightly different perspective helped them really it opened their minds up to how they might solve some of the underlying challenges with the process by thinking of it as an experience and thinking of it as not just a transaction but a relationship. And they managed to not just improve the relationships that they were having with their internal customers, with their call center managers. They also managed to shave off, I think, 2 or 3 days from their month-end process. By taking a design thinking approach, by understanding the real need, using that to have a more expansive idea on what the solutions to the problems might be, and then prototyping and testing them. So yeah, I guess that's a story of the opposite of what you're saying, or a reinforcing point to, organizations need to see that the business can solve real problems, and sometimes those real problems can be within the business, not just with the customers of the business. I'd like to think that some of the accountants in that team still use those lessons and think of things in human as well as process terms. And I know for a fact that the leader of that team still talks about that experience. So it must have some sort of ripple effect. That's number one. And number two, maybe to scale design thinking within that particular finance team, something we could have done even better was invite the finance director and their direct reports to take part in something that helped them relate to what their team had been through, processing and imagining what would, therefore that would have been helpful. Therefore, when, designing design thinking, maybe interventions or sprints, then some way of including the senior leadership, the enablers of the team that take part, to not just take part in a showcase at the end to understand what's happened, but actually, experience some of the way of working themselves would be really powerful.
So I think I think the light bulbs go off about design thinking when you have experienced it. I think no matter who you are in the organization, when you get into doing the work, using the process, that's when things start to click and you start to see the power of this approach to problem solving. And I think until you do that, it's just like this impossible sales pitch.
Yeah.
And I find you're either truly bought into design thinking or you're not. If all you're getting is the sales pitch around design thinking. But when you've done it, I think maybe those nots become maybes, because it's really hard. Like, in that example you shared, like those people, it's really hard for them to now dismiss design thinking because it solved a real pain point for them, right?
Yeah.
So even if they were, if they didn't believe before, now they have this tangible thing that is contradicting their belief.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. That makes me think of a couple of other examples where, the aforementioned kind of business owner, they would step into a piece of design thinking work, whether it's a day or several days or even a few weeks. And sometimes you can just tell that people are there just slightly reluctantly, and there's something that's forced them to be there. I'll be as blunt and direct as that. They're being made to be there rather than choosing to be there. So, not ideal in terms of somebody who is kind of steering the ship and calling the shots and deciding which way to go. And almost without fail, in fact, without fail, not almost, but without fail, at the end of the piece of work, as you were saying, they would be no longer a hard no. They would no longer be reluctantly there. They could actually start to see some value to them, some business value from taking the approach. So they were always moving from a hard no to a maybe, and sometimes even to a yes. This is definitely this, the classic resistor to a promoter, if you like. But to reinforce what you're saying, absolutely, that would not have been the case if we had brought people in and sat them down and got them to watch a bunch of videos on design thinking, or had a 2-hour or 3-hour presentation on this is what design thinking is. No matter how powerful, impactful any of the stories we can tell people about design thinking, until you've actually taken part yourself, then the lessons or the power of it doesn't sink in. And I'm kind of selling myself on it. Well, I'm looking, why did we never invite those senior and exec leaders to take part? Yeah, I'll add another word. Why haven't we done that yet? Thanks. I knew this would be a helpful conversation.
Here to help you, Pete.
Yeah, as always, lucky listener gets to get help as well, hopefully. Okay, so one, leaders aren't prepared. So 87% of people said their leaders were not prepared or able to support them. Number two is organizations need to see that design thinking can solve real business problems. So they need the hard evidence that this is actually going to make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on number two? I'm curious about number three, if there's not.
No, we can move on to number three. So number three is about only focusing on processes and tools. And what I mean by this is that organizations tend to find a design thinking process and go, okay, these are the steps. I'm going to run through the steps, and it becomes this arbitrary process. They also go, oh, we're going to be design thinking now, so we're going to go out and buy a bunch of Post-its and big rolls of paper and a bunch of Sharpies. And those two things are important. Mm-hmm. But if there isn't this third thing, then that's only going to take you so far. Okay. And the third thing is around
donuts.
Donuts always help.
Cake.
Coffee. I'll give you a hint. It's not food related.
Okay. A beer.
Okay. It's not food or beverage. It's not something you can consume.
Okay.
It's not something you can consume, but it is something you can build.
Oh.
The third one is that organizations don't pay attention to capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So process is about the how, right? We'd follow these steps. Mm-hmm. The tools help you with the process, right? You need a tool to do the how. The capabilities is what allows you to engage in the process and use the tools. So I think what happens, or what I'm seeing happening in organizations, is we go after the process because that is a good place to start. It's an easy place to start. You have to teach people how. We invest in the tools. Again, you need the right tools to do the right job. But if you only have those two things, then all you know how to do is really go step one, do this, step two, do this, step three, do this. You don't have the ability to go, how do I use this process in this situation? How do I use this process in this situation? What if I'm in a situation where I don't need step one? Can I just start with step two? And that's where capability comes in. So I think as long as we continue to only focus on process and tools, we're going to be limited as to our ability to use design thinking in every day or every situation is going to be very limited. What also came up around this is this idea of people talking about, well, I went to one workshop on design thinking. And there's almost this expectation that you're going to go to one workshop, come back, and now magically you're a design thinker. And I think this is where that capability work would really help, because the workshop gives you that foundational knowledge. Then building those capabilities helps you to continue using that beyond the workshop.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. This one is less surprising than 87%, and maybe kind of even more obvious to me than the seeing how it can solve real business problems. But I'm intrigued. You've got me thinking and intrigued. Two things. One is the relationship between capabilities, process, and tools, and whether those things are kind of chicken and egg. Where do you start? Do you start with all together, or is there a good sequence? And then the other thing that's got me intrigued about is probably because we were just talking about or telling a story about accountants and accounting. Does the same model apply to other areas of let's just call it business life? So let's say accounting. when you learn to become an accountant, are you being trained in the process, the tools, and the capabilities? And sort of mine's gone off on a tangent now. And a third, maybe a third question is, if that's the case, then what is it about design thinking capabilities or design capabilities that makes it challenging for organizations to focus on those?
Well, one, I think because we have never talked about design thinking as a capability.
Okay.
Two, we've viewed design thinking as one capability. And we know from my research on the design thinker profile that it's actually 6 capabilities. So design thinking is made up of 6 capabilities. One reason that we haven't focused on building capabilities is because we haven't understood the capabilities that enable design thinking. That's very relatively new. I also think that historically organizations have heavily focused on, and maybe this is even beyond organizations socially, we've focused on building this whole idea of hard skills, soft skills. There's been a lot of focus on STEM capabilities and things like that. So I think we're just now getting to that age where we're realizing, or that era in human existence, or period of human existence, that we're realizing we actually need more than those quote unquote hard skills, or we need, STEM skills alone aren't going to help us solve these problems. Historically, technology was starting to advance. We had this hope that technology was going to solve all of our problems, right? And technology has helped solve a lot of our problems. It's created a lot of problems. But technology is just a tool. Like, you have to understand the human problem and understand the humans to know what the technology needs to do. And I think that understanding and then seeing that second human skill set as just as important, that is a very new way of thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just kind of thinking about that, processing that. Yeah, that makes sense. That it's just, it's until now it's been less obvious that this is something that we need to do, or those capabilities. It's been less obvious until now that those are needed to solve the kind of problems that we now have. I think we might have talked about this before, Dani, but just help us understand. Well, I think it might be definitions time, quite late into the episode, I know, and there'll be a listener out there hanging out for when are they going to give us some definitions. Capability or capabilities. Let's talk about the definition. I know it's one of your favorite subjects, defining what a capability is or what a capability isn't.
So let's go to Google, a Google moment. According to Google, capability, the power or ability to do something. It can also be thought of as the extent of someone's ability.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty helpful. So the ability to do, the power or ability to do something. So I think what you're saying then is, as well as having a process and providing some tools, building the capability means, this sounds really obvious when I'm saying it, but build it means giving people the ability to actually use that process and those tools, and maybe if you don't focus on capability, building the capability, you give people a process and you give them the tools, and may never be able to use that process and tools in any more than the way that they've just experienced it. So kind of at best one way, but what we know is the power of design thinking is you can use it for lots of different things in lots of different ways. So organizations need to, I'm almost maybe the first question asked was what order should, or how does capability, process and tools relate to each other, and in your experience, what's a good way to build all three?
Before we move on to that, I do want to clarify something. So I just read you the general definition of what capability is. So in learning development, organizational science, human development, we also differentiate between capability and skill.
Okay.
So, skills are very specific things that we learn how to do, like typing or programming in a specific language. Whereas capabilities are broader, right? Capabilities are more enduring, and capabilities can be used in different contexts. Okay. So the reason that I'm clarifying that is because of what you were saying around the ability to take something from one context and apply it to something else. So when we teach somebody the process of design thinking, we're teaching them essentially a skill. Follow these 6 steps and it gets you to this result. But when you build their design thinking capabilities, what you're teaching, what you're giving them is the ability to go, here are the 6 steps, but now you're empowering them to go apply that in other contexts.
Okay. Yeah, this is landing with me stronger than it has before. When I knew this was one of your favorite hot topics about capability definition and skills definition. So let's see, one of the capabilities in the design thinker profile is empathetic exploration, and perhaps a skill, I could be wrong here, but a skill that might help with empathetic exploration or be part of empathetic exploration is let's call it interviewing.
Yep. Which is a skill.
Well, I'm getting a nod and a smile from Dani.
Okay,
I'm onto something here. So the skill is interviewing, the capability is empathetic exploration. So in an initial 1-day design thinking workshop, you might learn or you might have a first experience and start learning the skill of, let's say, intercept interviewing, where you get out of your comfort zone and go and speak to random members of the public in the street to understand what it's like to be them. So that's the skill. The capability or starting to develop is empathetic exploration. Yeah, an idea I've always had is, is starting off by, I think of it as learning the basics. And then, once you've learned the basics and you start to expand the tools that you use, and typically you're kind of using the tools in the way that they've been designed to use, and eventually you start to master something, and you almost create your own tools. So you could say the master craftsperson in the workshop, they're actually able to make their own tools. Let's say it's a woodworker, where they're probably able to make their own woodworking tools that do just the right job for a specific situation, and that helps them do their job in the same way that somebody who's mastering the skill or mastering I'll not use either skill, but they're achieving mastery in, let's say, workshop design and facilitation. Well, they might, the beginning of their journey, they will use other people's workshop activities or games, and once they start to master workshop design facilitation, then they'll actually be able to create from scratch their own activities, their own games.
Yeah. So another concrete example of that is, the skill of interviewing is linked to empathy.
Yeah.
The capability of empathy can show up, exploring empathetically can show up if we were in a disagreement and you're saying your point of view, I'm saying my point of view. My empathetic exploration capability can kick in and go, okay, instead of me trying to explain to Pete my point of view, why don't I try to understand his point of view? So that's the same capability showing up in 2 different skill sets, right?
Yeah, okay.
And I also want to clarify that it doesn't mean that skills and capabilities are equally valuable. Because if I didn't have the interviewing skills, I couldn't do design thinking work. If I didn't have a high degree of empathetic exploration, I could have the interviewing skills, but there's a lot I'm going to miss. Or I'm going to be one of those interviewers that just don't connect with people, and I can go through the process of interviewing but not really generate any meaningful insights.
Okay, that's a helpful addition to my kind of mental model of this. Yeah. All right. So what you're not saying, yeah, you're equally important, present in different ways. So then does that, maybe there is just no single answer to the question of where do you start? Do you start with process? Do you start with tools? Do you start with process and tools, or do you start with capability?
Well, there isn't a right or wrong answer. Well, there is a wrong answer, and the wrong answer is only to focus on the wrong answer is to not focus on all three.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a clear wrong answer, but there really isn't a right answer because, one, we know from research that a lot of design thinking capabilities are innate human capabilities, which means that these are things that as humans, we intuitively are able to do. We just haven't done a good job of building them purposefully. So if you think about that, we can actually be working. If we understand what those capabilities are, we can actually be working to build those capabilities way before we introduce the process of design thinking. To flip that process, teaching somebody a process is a really easy way to start something, right? Like you think about when you're trying to teach somebody how to cook, you give them a recipe and walk them through the steps. It's an easy way to teach people and get people started. And if you're going to give them the process, then you certainly have to give them the tools, because nothing's more frustrating than knowing how to do something and not having the right tool to do it. You can start building the capabilities and then introduce design thinking as the process and give people the tools, or you can teach them a process, give them the tools, and then focus on building capabilities. And I haven't done research on this to know if one's better than the other. And I don't know that intuitively, I don't think it matters, but that's just my intuition, not research based.
Yeah.
But I do know absolutely certainly that not focusing on capabilities won't get you very far.
I like articulating this as there is a wrong answer, and maybe that means that all other answers are a lot more helpful. And maybe the kind of missing ingredient, or well, going backwards from number 3 to number 2 and then number 1. Well, the other missing ingredients are focusing on capabilities and process and tools, all three of those, in order to solve real business problems, and then also including leadership in understanding and learning what those capabilities, process, and tools are.
I also think there's an element for leaders to understand how to lead design thinkers, because I think that it requires a primary shift in how you lead people.
So that's different so how to lead design thinkers is distinct from actually, participating in a design thinking activity, becoming a design thinker yourself as a leader.
But you need both, right? Because you need to have that experience of what it's like to be design thinking. And then you have to have that understanding of, okay, how do I lead others to do this? And that's no different than leading anything else, right? Like if you're leading accountants, you need to have some understanding of what accountant is. You may not need to be the best accountant, but you've got to have some idea that, it's about balancing numbers and things like that. But then you also have to understand, well, how do I lead this group of accountants? And I think it's the same with leading design thinkers.
Yeah, nice. Immediately that comes to mind. I had a mentor, a sponsor actually, when I was on a development program, a brilliant, wise leader who had lots of experience from, leading in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, which is when, and then like the early 2000s, which is when I met him. He used to say, you don't have to be a good horse or have been a good horse to be a good jockey. I think that's a really helpful helpful analogy. It immediately came to mind when you were talking there. Whatever you think of horse racing and animal interaction, and the mental images that conjures up on the relationship between the horse and the rider. But I think it's a good point. You don't, to be a good leader, you don't necessarily have to be the most skillful at the craft. What you do need to do is understand how horses behave pretty well, and therefore how to help the horse be the best horse it can be.
Which brings us back to empathy.
yeah. I'm now kind of going to run up against a little bit of a mental conflict in that my partner is a vet, and vets are trained not to anthropomorphize, which means don't look at animals and think that or expect them to behave like people. So don't anthropomorphize, but as nonetheless, I think a jockey, because they spend a lot of time with horses, and jockeys especially, they typically start as stable hands and really understand and learn. I guess they probably truly do empathize with horses and really understand how horses behave generally and in the moment, and how specific horses behave. They know how to help the horse be the best horse it can in the moment, but they'll never be a horse. Dear. I hope no one tunes into this expecting some.
I feel like we started off on such a high note with research and some numbers, and now we're ending with a jockey who will never be a horse. Well, there you have it, folks.
my dad was asking me the other day if I'd ever thought about getting a tattoo, and I said unequivocally no, but I don't know. Maybe I can see that.
You'll never be a horse.
A jockey will never be a horse tattooed down my forearm.
All right, dear. I think on that note,
we'll call the episode "Why a Jockey Will Never Be a Horse." Yes, what we're saying here is to be a good leader of designers, a good design leader, you don't necessarily have to be, have been the best designer. And what we're saying is that we can expand that thought to apply to people who never have been, never will be designers, but they need to learn how to lead people who will be design thinking as part of their job, whether that's, you're using design thinking in finance, in HR, marketing, brand, customer experience, anywhere. Yeah.
Shall we do what we're taking away today?
Yes, let's do that.
What are you taking away today, Peter?
Well, a couple of things I'm taking away. Once again, as ever with our conversations, Dani, you help me learn and you help me see things a bit more clearly and remind me of some things. I am taking away, well, this is going to sound like cheating, but those three things, I narrow it down because I'm really shocked and surprised that 87% is the proportion of people who don't get the right support from their leaders. That's almost like the headline. This is why we need to focus on building capability through the whole organization. I'm just looking at my notes that I've taken. Maybe my main takeaway is actually skills and capabilities are equally important. It's not one or the other, and it's not. It's that and the need to focus on capability, process, and tools, and not leave any out.
So you've got 2 takeaways today.
At least 2. There's so many. I probably, I'll leave it there.
Well, what I'm taking away today, is that a jockey will never be a horse.
Excellent. There we go. There's our podcast summarized. The yin and yang.
So that is my takeaway today.
Okay.
So thank you, Peter.
Pleasure.
All right. So I think that does it for us in this episode. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.